I went too far.
Goats and bloods and rivers and
Okay. I believe this is it. All right. So last week, we covered 2 bowls, and we'll try to cover 2 more bowls or vials tonight. But real quickly, we looked at the second bowl, which was targeted at the sea, and of course we talked about how the sea ran like blood of dead men. Of course, blood doesn't run, so many things became very stagnant. Commerce, things of that nature, became to a standstill, and because it ran red with blood, we talked about the naval battles that took place and the tens of thousands of men who died at sea at these battles, and how violent they were, how much exchange went on back and forth between them. And we talked about how large the guns were, which is extremely interesting history. And real quickly, this one battle we talked about, just history records this, that during these operations, 200 ships of the line, and then the beast worshippers, and between 300 and 400 frigates, and incalculable number of vessels. So history records that it was just an enormous loss of ships and men, because they just didn't have lifeboats and safety systems like we have today.
What was Trafalgar?
Trafalgar. It was a battle where the British fought Napoleon, and Spain had aligned with them. There was a big sea battle, and Napoleon lost it in that one. Even though he wasn't in the battle, his ships were destroyed, and it actually became a holiday in England, this battle. And it was very well done, the way the fella, the general who won the day.
I thought that was Admiral Nelson, was it not?
That sounds familiar. I
Fluid
forgot
Admiral
what his name was, but that sounds familiar.
And on Trafalgar Day, they
Yeah.
drowned those short French people in the Falcon.
Anyway, yes,
I just mentioned that looking at the history and reading over it some more, this in the second vial, Napoleon's his mission, providential mission, was to destroy the Holy Roman Empire, which was central continental Europe. But when he decided to go beyond the boundaries of that, as in this second vial, to extend beyond the land areas of the empire, he encountered Britain, who was an island nation, and he lost the war against Britain. But there was, as you said, much bloodshed as the result of those encounters with the British. But actually the British turned Napoleon back to continental Europe and didn't allow him to have mastery of the seas, so to speak.
yeah, they kept him. He lost at the sea. He lost when he went to Russia, and he lost when he tried to go down into Africa. So
Right.
He never won. But inside of Europe, he was unstoppable.
Yeah, he devastated it, right?
Yeah. So we talked about that last week somewhat, and we showed that on the map. But anyway, despite the British victory over the Franco-Spanish navies, Trafalgar had negligible impact on the remainder of the war, the Third Coalition. And we talked about, there were 7 coalitions. I knew it was 6 or 7, but today I read it was like 7 coalitions total, or different groups of countries that got together and tried to end him. And this was the 3rd one. And even though he lost his naval battle, he did not lose. He actually ended up defeating the coalition of nations. So it went on 7 different times. The other countries tried to stop him, and they finally did. We might talk about that tonight. And then there was the 3rd bowl, which was, and the 3rd angel poured out his bowl on the rivers and fountains of water, and they became blood. So this is where he did very well. And we talked about this land area that was the same land area that Attila the Hun came through in the 3rd trumpet. Very interesting that it worked out that way. And let me go back so you can see it. And I mentioned last week, there's, of all times, there's Ukraine sitting right there at that. And this is where another war is about to take place. And this, boy, it's already taking place. But if Russia keeps going like she's going, it's going to be right in this same area again. And it was actually on the news. I just saw it on the news today, and I never even thought about it. They talked about the large amount of Catholicism believing people in the area. It's still
Well,
very
Ukraine-
strong.
In Ukraine,
Ukraine,
it's Roman,
Roman,
no, sorry, it's not Roman Catholic, it's
No.
Orthodox.
It's Russian Orthodox.
It's Russian Orthodox.
Right.
They hate the Catholics.
yeah, I know, but there's still, those beliefs are there. that they-
They're all descended from the same.
Yeah, they all-
Their beliefs are very different than Catholicism, though.
Yeah, but that's where they came
That's
from.
where they all came from. though.
Well, not fundamentally, just the way they're structured, the patriarch of the Eastern Orthodox Church does not recognize the Pope as being the vicar of Christ or the representative of God on earth. So that's what the big division was in 1054, that they didn't, they didn't recognize the Pope in the West as being of that supreme position.
Well, it's pretty much the same way England was,
Yeah, right, with Henry VIII, right?
There, the Trinitarian teachings and things of that nature are all part of that. They didn't give all that up. Just to put that out there, that it's still strong in that area, and it's one day going to have to be removed. And we know it'll be removed. So, what?
The key difference between them is iconography.
I don't know what that is.
The Russian Orthodox is focused on icons that represent the faith, splinters of wood from this and toenails or whatever from saints. It has these physical connections, and they're called icons, and they're basically icons, if you will, in the sense having your
Relics.
big relics and things like that. And that's, if you look at it, that's kind of the prime dividing line between these two faiths, if you look at it.
but aren't the Catholics like that too?
But not to the degree that these guys.
They were until Martin Luther. I think they all
Yeah.
dropped. They all dropped the whole thing with the relics because nobody believes in it anymore.
Okay, well, yeah, there's a lot of history there. But those same blasphemous teachings still exist. All right, so, and again, as we said, that this is where Napoleon did his best work. He won 26 battles in this area, and with Germany, Austria, Italy, and all these things. So the rivers ran red with blood. You can see all the little tributaries. I'm sure many men died in crossing them and things of that nature in the battles. So the battles that he lost so badly kept him confined to the area of God's purpose for him.
Yeah.
And of course, he never was aware of it. And shortly after he was defeated in the disastrous Egyptian campaign by the British Navy, much of Austria territory was retaken. And then we talked about, but when he got back to France, he was elevated to ruler of France. And in 1800, he took back much of northern Italy in a single day. So he would get knocked down, and then he'd get right back in the fight and strike again. It's like you can't kill this guy for some reason. But he had a purpose to serve. And then, of course, we talked about Napoleon's self-coronation as emperor in 1804, and all showing that this was the end of this two-horn land period. And he talked about what immortal was to him was in the memories of men. And he had these reliefs made showing that he's putting the crown on his head and not the Pope. So we see this era from Charlemagne to his era it's run its course to where this is where an emperor was first crowned by a Pope. And then when Napoleon's there, he removes that power from him. So it's a very important piece of history that happened at this time. But again, and I mentioned it last week, these 4 or 5 bowls or vials overlap each other. They're not like one happened and then the next one started and so on. they're sort of happening at simultaneous times. So here's where we pick up tonight at the fourth bowl. This was sort of the little cliffhanger I left you with. Let's see. Let's start with Gerald. Would you read this first slide here?
Sure. Revelation 16 verse, angel poured out his bowl on the sun, and it was given unto him to scorch people with fire.
All right, so you see the word him. So
Mhm.
the fourth angel poured out his bowl on the sun, and it was given unto him. That's whatever's in that bowl is personified to scorch people with fire. It's not like he's pouring boiling oil on people or something like that. Whatever the bowl is doing is personified because there is a man involved in it. All right, let's move forward as we go through this. This is things to think about, and I didn't catch it the first few times when I was putting this class together. You think about the sun doing the scorching. You know, we get sunburn. You know, and it's the hottest thing in our solar system, and everything we think about. It would be unbearable. But the bowl is poured on the sun, which means, and we've seen symbols like this before in the sixth seal. Let's go back so we can get an idea of what it's trying to tell us. If we go back to the sixth seal, let's see who's next there. Joanne, can you read this? We're back in Revelation 6 now for a moment.
Okay, Revelation 6:12. I watched as he opened the sixth seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth and made of goat hair. The whole moon turned blood red.
Okay, so we talked about this before, that it's targeting the sun is what's being targeted in the sixth seal, which of course was a ruling power. It was the Roman power. So we come back and it was the eclipsing of the pagan Rome because it turned black. Well, we have something similar here. It is not the sun that is doing the scorching. I really had to think about it and once I picked it up and I see, okay, I have seen this before. The sun is the recipient of the bowl of wrath being poured out. I have a picture of the sun here, but this is, of course, it's not literally what's happening. It's only an imagery because of how John might have seen it. So who is the sun and who is doing the scorching? So that's what we have to understand what this is talking about. We have to identify these two things. So now remember, this is all about bringing this whole system, this Holy Roman Empire system down, and it's being brought down piece by piece as he moves, as Napoleon moves around. Things like that are happening. And I will suggest to you from history that this is the sun, and this is Francis II of Austria, and he was the last emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Remember, like when paganism fell, that was the ruling thing. Well, he's the ruling power, military power at this time. He's the strongest one of all of the nations that exist at that time. Austria was the more powerful one. The others weren't quite as powerful. And he was extremely entrenched in the whole Holy Roman Empire. And like the sixth seal, the sun is about to be eclipsed. Well, it's saying here that the sun is about to be scorched. So what on earth does that mean? It's how is that all going to work out? This is the guy who fought Napoleon with the coalitions. When you hear about Russia or Austria being in these different coalitions, this is the guy here that was putting up that fight with him. And he was one of the more stronger ones of these coalitions. I would suggest to you that is one of the horns of the two horned beast of the earth at this time. Remember, those two horns came up was the religious and the military powers. And of course, as one man died, another one would take his place. And he is like, let's say, the last man standing of that, the horn of this time, and the Pope that's in power at this time, which we're going to look at tonight in some detail. He's the last Pope standing, so to speak, when Napoleon is doing his thing. And he's the one that would be in the same seat as Charlemagne was in his day. He's that strongest power. He was the military horn, and the Pope was the religious horn. So, so how were they scorched? And there's a small piece of history that most people would never ever know was recorded that seemed to tell us what that is. Now, we have seen this used before about war. So I'm going to show you a little something here. And I kind of used this picture before, back, remember when gunpowder was being created with the Ottomans and all. Napoleon was an artillery commander. In other words, he was the one that as he was coming up through the ranks, he was the one who was, the batteries of cannons, where they would be set up, the best way to fire them and all that stuff. And he was proficient at it. That's what he was known for his ability to use those cannons to their best and get the job done. And tens of thousands of beast worshippers died as a result of these conflicts with Napoleon. Now, I'm going to show you something. So how do you know that this this is the scorching taking place? Well, of course, we know cannons put off a lot of fire, as we see right here. But it's not so much the image here as what was recorded. In his battle against the Mamelukes, now I don't know who the Mamelukes are, I didn't look at it to any detail. In Egypt, they called him the king of fire. If that is that a coincidence? I don't think so. He was the king of fire because of his ability to use the cannon so effectively against them. It's something that's real hard to go up against, especially at point blank range. Now, this might seem like an insignificant statement to the world, but I truly, as I've studied through this, think that these are some of the little breadcrumbs that we have been given to tell us that we're still, again, looking in the right direction. I think that's an amazing statement to be said. And that these Mamelukes, what little bit I looked at, or I remember from about 5 years ago when I looked into it, they were cavalry going up against his cannons. Now, he did lose down in Egypt eventually, but it wasn't an easy victory over him. And I actually have, this is an actual picture of, it's called the Battle of the Pyramids, and it actually happened supposedly in sight of the pyramids that we know today on July 21st, 1798. Now, to look at the picture, it might be a little hard to figure out what's going on there. But if you look right in the middle there, you'd have to get up, you got to kind of get close to the picture to see it. You've got all these people charging on horses up this hill. And if you notice to the very far right, under at the corner of the pyramid there, you see all these puffs of fire, their cannons firing at them. You imagine charging into those cannons. It would be quite a intimidating thing, but this is how history recorded this battle. Even though he lost it, this is how it was recorded, of him just firing all these cannons into him. So anyway, I thought it was very significant to help us understand what this scorching was. And it just so happened on December 2nd, 1805, Napoleon soundly defeated the combined forces of Austria and Russia. It's interesting that we're at this point with all this going on today. Um, The next year in 1806, the Holy Roman Empire was dissolved. Now, we got another couple of bowls to go here, but this is the history to show you that Austria was this sun that was scorched and could not whip him. It doesn't mean that when the Holy Roman Empire was dissolved, that, you know, the Catholic Church just disappeared. But the military and religious coalition between church and state did. That beast of the earth had run its course, and that time was at that end. So if a lot of people, you know, they still are looking, who don't understand the Revelation, still think these things are in the future, but they ran that part finished its course over 200 years ago. So, but anyway, is there any questions as we move on? Because I'm kind of rolling along here.
So what verse are we in right now?
What was it?
I found a few restaurants. There's Giovanni's Pizza Pasta and subs.
Thanks for
0.7
waking
miles
up.
away.
Did I say Alexa?
Yes, you.
Shut up, Alexa.
7 miles away on Road.
Alexa, stop.
All right, so the Holy Roman Empire, known as the Holy Roman Empire, lasted right at 1,006 years, where it was called the Holy Roman Empire.
What are the dates?
Huh?
What are the dates?
Well, the period started with Charlemagne, but at that time it wasn't called the Holy Roman Empire.
So I guess if you just subtract it from 1806, then we go back
Yeah,
to
yeah.
800,
Eight,
800, right?
mhm.
No, yeah, 800.
Late eight.
That's 1,006 years back.
Yes, okay.
So,
What?
so you're saying that that all these bowls were actually performed or poured out on the beast, and those on the people who bore the mark of the beast and worshipped its image.
Yeah, because it said that back in the first book, the source, you
Uh-huh.
know, that those who had the mark of the beast. So,
Uh-huh.
all right, so that, it brings us now to the fifth bowl. Now, I'm using this picture here because, again, these things overlap when Austria and Holy Roman Empire dissolved, but there were other stories happening at the same time that were suffering. And that's kind of what we're going to look at here. Let's see who's next up there. On my screen, Patsy, you're next. Would you read this?
Revelation 16:10, and the fifth angel poured out his bowl upon the seat of the beast.
Okay, so we see that, all right, this is targeting something. First it was the sun, and the last one, the seas, and the second one, and so on. So we're now targeting the seat of the beast. And I would suggest to you that this is the seat of the beast. Now, I don't know if you remember from that picture, that coronation picture, picture I showed. I told you last week, this is the guy, you're going to see him again. This is the same guy. He's even painted. You can tell it's him by just the way it's painted. This is the guy, and I kind of was looking at him today as I was going over this. He looks pretty frail here. It didn't paint him in a way that he looked all that healthy, but he looks like he's run a lot of his course of his life. But anyway, he is the one who had to deal with Napoleon. Let me see, I got it here. This is Pope Pius VII. Seventh. And look at the dates that he was Pope from 1800 to 1823. That is that's those years. Remember in the coronation picture was like 1804 that Napoleon crowned himself and didn't let him do it. In 1800 is when he returned to France. We just talked about it earlier, is when he lost in Egypt and he went back to France and became Emperor of Rome, of France, and so on. So he's in this whole piece of history. He's the one that's dealing with this nightmare across Europe.
I just want to understand the bowl that was poured on the sun. You just said the sun was the emperor of the time?
Well, they were the ones that were battling him, and the history records that his cannons were the scorching things that scorched them, because he was called the King of Fire.
So Napoleon is the fire, or?
Yeah, the Napoleon is the bowl that's being poured out on him, where whatever he does, this thing, the suffering that he's pouring out on Austria and this coalition. And he was recorded as being known as the King of Fire, which fits with the scorching.
Brother August?
Yeah, a lot to take. Yes, Gerald.
The sun symbolically usually represents the government, the secular aspect of the government in power at the time. This commentary here that I'm looking at says the sun is a very appropriate symbol for the supreme or sovereign power of a political universe. So that would be very applicable to this two-horned beast of the earth, or the Holy Roman Empire, that the sun represents the secular aspect of the Holy Roman Empire, whereas the papacy represents the ecclesiastical aspect of the empire. So the vial of God's wrath being poured up on the sun, the symbolism of the sun, on the secular form of that empire, as you mentioned in the Astro, or the Hungarian, Austrian-Hungarian seat of the empire at the time. So yeah, that was the first part of the empire that was destroyed under the fourth vial. Now under the fifth vial, we're going to destroy the ecclesiastical aspect of that empire, or the second horn of the two-horned goat that we were introduced to in chapter 13, where it was shown to be developing as the two-horned beast of the earth, which we understand, as you mentioned, and that represented Charlemagne when he was crowned head of the Holy Roman Empire in the secular form or aspect of the empire, by the Pope of the time, representing the ecclesiastical aspect. In other words, the two horns that are mentioned there that constituted that beast that arose upon the earth at the time of the coronation of Charlemagne. So it's the secular aspect of the empire, the governmental and the military, and it's not the ecclesiastical, but it's all that speaks to the rest of what makes up an empire. And it's the emperor himself. That's what the two horns represent. One horn representing the emperor and the other horn representing the Pope and the territories or the aspects of those kings over which they rule.
I'm confused though, because I thought we were talking about bowls, not horns. Are we talking about bowls?
The bowl of God's wrath is what was poured out upon these two different aspects of the empire.
Bowls are being poured out on those horns.
Yeah.
Does it use the word horns in the two verses?
In the previous parallel, it uses the two horns of a little lamb. Here now you see a sun and you see the other symbol.
I'm just trying to simplify it rather than make it complicated for my head so I can remember it. So the fourth bowl is Napoleon being poured out on all the nations, including the Austrian-Hungarian Empire.
Yeah, he brings
Does he
down the
defeat it?
Austrian, he defeats the Austrian.
And
Who
Russia.
he was the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire at that time. He had a lot of military authority over the Holy Roman Empire, but the Pope had the religious authority.
That's
which
the
is
fifth
actually
bowl.
high. Yeah.
Which is about to be.
Oh, now he's targeting the other horn with the fifth bowl. So
The ecclesiastical aspect of the Holy Roman Empire.
right.
It wasn't all dissolved completely together. Both the two horn aspects that made up the Holy Roman Empire The empire itself was not, the governmental and military aspect of the kingdom was defeated first, as Brother Roger just pointed out, with Austria. But then the second horn that speaks to the ecclesiastical or religious aspect of the kingdom is about to be taken care of under the fifth vial. So
Simple.
it says the fifth.
No, it is very simple, and I'm like, it's getting too complicated. So bowl 4 is Napoleon destroying the nations, including Russia and the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Bowl 5 is poured out on the Pope. Am I understanding correctly so far?
The seat of
Just
the
want
beast.
to demystify it because it keeps going around in circles. So that makes sense to me if everybody agrees.
Yeah, it just expands on what the little.
Okay, just
The
getting-
vial was poured out upon the sun. What does the sun represent? It represents the secular, governmental, military aspect of the Holy Roman Empire. That's what the scourge of Napoleon in the hand of deity was poured out upon, that part of the empire. That's what's represented in the vial being poured out. It's the judgments of God being poured out upon that first part of the Roman Empire.
All right. All right, well, all right, let's move forward here then and see what happens to our Mr. Pius VII. All right, let's see. So let's read verse 10. Let's see, Patsy read. Helen, are you there?
Yes, Revelation 16:10. And his kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain.
There's a kind of an odd phrase. They gnawed their tongues for pain. So what we don't see is death so much as we see something just sort of like the sores is something that is very painful. So what does that mean? That's here we go. That's what we're going to cover here now in the next few slides. What all that means. So let's see who has it got. Susie, are you able to
I can read it.
read? And she's on her new system. I didn't know.
No.
No? Did she say it? All right, Joe will read. All right.
During the same time, by 1800, Napoleon had greatly weakened the Holy Roman Empire. Its territorial possessions and monasteries in France were confiscated for a while. Catholic worship was forbidden.
Okay, so this is what he's inflicting on them. Of course, if you see the date, 1800, and even he stopped Catholic worship. He brought it to a total standstill. And what we're going to see through these next few slides is that then he released it back in at his convenience to work for him and not against him. We will see that history records how he used the church to his advantage. Like we talked about before, that he was a deist. So he didn't put any stock in revelations and things like or immortality. Yes, Joe.
Part of the reason this was done was because of the cost of the American Revolution. It was never paid back. It caused the French Revolution. So to pay for all this, the church had never paid taxes. So he was like, oh, yes, you are.
Yeah, I have something on that. We're going to get to that.
He confiscated all the monasteries, all the churches, all the schools, all the universities that were associated with Catholicism so they could start paying. Because they needed it in their coffers. They didn't have it.
Right. Well, he actually, I'm going to show you here, probably about another 5 or 6 slides where he made sure that history understood that. So, yeah, Walter.
And so don't miss in viable, whatever you want to call it, 4 and 5, the purpose of them. We haven't really, you make it sound like, oh, it's just get rid of the Holy Roman Empire and so forth and so on. But its purpose was to inflict upon the people that they should turn back to God and give him the honor and glory. But
And away from Catholicism.
and then but in doing so, it tells us they did not repent and return to him.
But they like knowing their tongues.
Exactly. So the fourth the fifth files, they're bringing these punishment upon people, but they will not return to the one true religion, the one true God. And he inflicts these sufferings upon them, and they do not say, oh, God must be upset with us. We should turn back to him. But they don't see that. And so hence the fourth and fifth bowls are all about this process God is doing.
I think Helen's talking.
I'm sorry, Eric came in and I forgot I was unmuted. He's bringing me my dinner.
Ooh, right.
Okay, well, let's look at this history now that was actually recorded about what we're talking about here. This is a picture, again, one of Napoleon's immortality things that he had going on, his own idea of immortality. This is a signing of the Concordat in 1801. And I just noticed it today, and I've seen this picture 1,000 times. It looks like there's a picture of him riding into glory on the wall there and everything. But I did not know what a Concordat was. Of course, it's a French word, but a Concordat was an agreement between the government and the church of how things would be conducted. So this is church and state deciding how we're now going to move forward. The church was no longer the highest authority in the land, which it always used to be for hundreds of years. Napoleon used, as you remember, the church to his advantage, and he never intended to destroy it. Catholicism was reinstated as the religion of France. So he allowed it to be reinstated as a France. Okay, you can start your services again and all, but what he did, he brought it to a standstill when he came into control, and then he released it as a control lever at his convenience of how much it could do. And of course, people would see once they got their church back and things like that, that they might see him as merciful or something like that. But he saw it as not doing the harm it used to do, but people needed their religious services and all to help them keep themselves in line and stuff like that. The confiscated lands were not returned. This is something that happened because that became the wealth of his government. Now he kept a lot of this stuff, and you can think about a lot of the wealth that went on here is that they would have had. Let's read this. Let's see who's next. Walter, I guess you're next, unless there's somebody I'm missing up there. Oh, David and wait a minute, David and Nancy are here too. David, would you read this?
While the Concordat restored some ties, the papacy, it was largely in favor of the state. The balance of church-state relations had tilted firmly in Napoleon's favor. Now he could win favor with the Catholics within France, while also controlling Rome in a political sense.
Okay, yeah, okay, that's historically written that way. I took that right off the internet, that this is how he used it. And he used it in a good way. If you think about it, if you're a person in the world, he gave them their church back, but he took the power away from the Pope to where, you know, he wasn't the large and in charge anymore. It probably freed a lot of people up from certain religious things that they suffered from. Okay, Nancy, would you read this?
Wait a minute. Gotta get our speaker on. Napoleon once told his brother Lucien in April 1801, skillful conquerors have not gotten entangled with priests. They both contain them and use them.
Okay, so there it is right there. Exactly. He knew how to manage a country's religions and stuff like that. He was an extremely intelligent general leader. And of course, he had a big ego. He wanted to rule the world, but at the same time, he knew how to bring law and order. And as we talked about a number of times, that some of the things that Napoleon set in motion still are there today. They were good things. They created order in cities and things like that, and laws that he knew how to make things run efficiently. That's what was good about him on that end. But again, ego also drove him to his disasters. And his failings in battle to take more. There's a lot of wisdom in the things that he did. The church had no moral, emotional sway over him, as he was, as we said, a deist mindset, that God was not involved in the affairs of men. So he didn't worry about what God thought of him or anything like that, because he doesn't believe God's even involved in this. So every man makes his own immortality. And again, here's another relief that makes him at least immortal for a little while. So at least up into our time. So moving on, as it says, sometime later, Napoleon invaded the Papal States and annexed them into France. And just to remind people what the Papal States were, that you recognize this map here, the boot of Italy there, the orange area, or the area is called the Papal States. And those were the areas that the Pope was literally considered like a king over. He had influence over the whole Holy Roman Empire from the map I showed you that went from, Italy all the way up to the northern part of Europe. But this was the part that he was literally like king over. So he dethroned him in this manner and annexed them into his own world. So you can imagine the wealth that came with all that. He's just taking everything away. He's taking his land away from him and everything. So,
Brother Roger?
yes.
Now, regarding those Papal States, there were actually three different sovereign countries right there on the peninsula of Italy, and prophetically, those were the ones that were uprooted. The three was uprooted, and it's called the gift of Pepin. King Pepin of France was the one who gifted those three states to the Pope, and made the Pope then essentially a secular ruler. He was a landowner and a ruler over those three once independent and sovereign states, so he became a secular ruler over those Papal States that they're become known as.
You remember when that was? That was way back.
That was in 757 when Pepin, King of France, came to the aid of the Pope, because there was no empire at the time. That was before 800 AD in the Holy Roman Empire. So the kings of France came to the aid of the Pope in the West whenever the barbarians began to intrude and come in from the east and north and so forth during that time period. And so it was called the gift of Pepin, when he gifted the Pope with those three states that he had conquered there on the peninsula, and made the Pope then a secular ruler.
I believe Pepin was, now that I think about it, wasn't he Charlemagne's father?
He was.
So yeah, so that power was already building.
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Already in Central Europe.
Right. All right. Okay, let's see, Walter, you want to read this?
I can, but don't forget about Mike and Fonda.
Who? Oh, they're not, I can't see the names real well, so I forget who's there. Fonda, can you read?
Sure.
Didn't mean to miss you.
When he was excommunicated by the Pope, Napoleon's men took him captive and exiled him.
Okay, that's like totally taking his power. That used to be very powerful to be excommunicated. It was like the black mark on your forehead that people would always shun you. Napoleon just said, right, whatever.
But you gotta love it. I mean, for
Yeah.
years and years and years, the Pope has had this power in his back pocket.
Right.
The worst thing I can do to you is excommunicate you. Nobody will do
Right.
business with you.
Right.
It's not like today. If you don't go to church, nobody cares. Nobody gives a rip if you go to church or not. But back then, if you were excommunicated by the church, there was no business. You weren't respected. All of it came apart.
You could become extremely ruined
And that even happened in the Anglican church down in Williamsburg and Jamestown. If you were blackballed, it was over. So
It was the
this
same
is,
with the Sanhedrin, you know,
yeah.
if
well, I
they
just
threw you
think
out of the
it's
synagogue.
So awesome that he arrested him.
Yeah.
And exiled the Pope.
Well,
Yeah.
actually, it
That's
was,
amazing.
I think I had it about 2 weeks ago. His men actually did it, and Napoleon didn't free him, but his men like took it upon themselves to go to grab him. As history seems to record it, but Napoleon didn't pardon him. He didn't say like, well, put the old guy back, you know.
Actually, Napoleon, early on, after he defeated the Austrian Empire there, or the emperor in the secular form of the Holy Roman Empire, Napoleon turned towards the Pope and tried to have an amicable relationship with him, and offered the Pope to come around to Napoleon's views as the way that Napoleon saw or perceived the empire ought to be structured and operated. But the Pope did not conform to that, did not agree with that, and that's why they continued on in an adverse relationship. But he did hold out an olive branch to the Pope right after the Austro-Hungarian Empire was defeated, or the one you had mentioned there early on the screen, the secular form of the two-horned beast of the earth, Roman Empire. So it didn't work out that Napoleon's strategy there was to befriend the Pope, so to speak, and have that empire operate on a more friendly basis. So as a result of it, it ended up in war. You know, that's what the fifth vial is talking about when it says it poured out his vial on the seat of the beast, and it talks about darkness. Of course, the darkness was a result of the eclipse of the sun that is mentioned there in vial 4. The eclipse of the sun, or the secular form of that empire, when that was destroyed, there was no military support, no governmental support, nothing for the papacy at Rome to fall back on and depend on. So that's what formed the darkness there that they were plunged into at the time of the fifth vial being poured out here, as it's mentioned.
All right. So thank you, Gerald. So at this time, the seat of the beast is plunged into darkness. The papal kingdom is extinguished, and the Holy Roman Empire has pretty much become terminated. That's this whole kingdom kind of thing. It's now back to just a church and a religion. But if we haven't covered this yet, in 1610, and they gnawed their tongues for pain. All right, so I'm going to suggest to you what the brethren who have studied before for me, what it might be. And again, this is where Napoleon tries to seal his immortality. This is another relief that he had made. And this is Napoleon and the Pope at Fontainebleau. You can see it's that same Pope in 1809, where he was exiled.
Fontainebleau.
Fontainebleau.
No.
I'm not. Napoleon brought much pain and humiliation to the papacy. As history records, the Pope was made to pay the expenses of the war. And this picture, if you look at it real closely, this would sort of look like, here's the bill, buddy. And you can see the Pope holding out his hand and say, don't show me that. Now, whether he actually stood there with the Pope and posed for this picture, or of course, probably not. I don't think the Pope would have sat through it enough to get this written, but Napoleon, this is another one of those reliefs that he had made. But this is how Napoleon made sure history was recorded by having this done. And this is his immortality that he pursued.
Well, Roger.
Yes.
Why would Napoleon think that the papacy had any money that they could finance the expenses of the entire war? Why would he think that?
I don't know. You probably have an answer.
it's the richest entity on the face of the earth, even
Yeah.
as it is today. The Vatican billions is notorious, you know, it's just a matter of fact. The church has more money than any entity on the face of the earth.
Yeah, the fact is, they don't even know how much the Vatican has because they don't allow anybody to audit them. That
Right.
they've gotten that anonymity or whatever it is, where the government has agreed never to audit them, and there's only like one man. I was reading this in a book that I'm going to mention here shortly. The Vatican Exposed. That there's only one man who, other than the Pope, who knows what the figures are in the book. You know, who keeps the book records. It's locked up and everything. But of course, when he took the Papal States, when he annexed all that, he was able to confiscate all that stuff. And of course, there was probably a lot of hidden wealth that he probably tried to get to. So
Not only the material wealth, but the very that belong to the church and the wealth that is attached to that, you know.
all right, so this is another one of those things that only Napoleon had done. You know, he really had that ego thing of preserving himself in time. He was a perfect man for the job. He remained in exile, that's the Pope, until the defeat of Napoleon 5 years later. And I actually just put this together tonight. Of course, we know that he was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo. And I actually went online. Okay, I probably should have this in here. Let's see, who? Mike, are you there? No.
I'll read it.
Okay. This is a picture that was painted by this fellow, William Sadler. Maybe he saw it or not, but this is the Battle of Waterloo. It's a very famous painting that's out there. Where Napoleon is and all of this, I have no idea, but as you can see, it looks like a mess. So anyway, go ahead, Wanda.
That white horse, right? Anyways, with the sword pointing to the left. Okay, well, the Battle of Waterloo was fought on 18 June 1815 near the Waterloo in the United Kingdom of the Netherlands. A French army under the command of Napoleon was defeated by two of the armies of the Seventh Coalition. The battle marked the end of the Napoleonic Wars. The defeat at Waterloo ended Napoleon's rule as emperor.
Okay, that's something I just threw together today. I thought, we talk about this guy so much. Let's talk about his military demise. We already saw a picture of him dead in his casket and all. So anyway, that's what happened to him. But as you can see, I thought it was interesting. There were 7 coalitions that in the 7th try, that was the charm. That was the one that finally defeated him. But he had run his course as God wanted him to run. And he had done what he needed to do, but he did change a lot of things that, again, still exist today. All right, so I'm gonna go through these next slides real quick because it's the end of this and I only got like 2 minutes. So I'm just gonna read through them because we still got this in Revelations 11:16, it says, and they blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores and repented not of their deeds. Now here we have the sores again. Those things are still hurting. Those ulcer sores that we talked about, they're still there. Even in this far along in the chapter. Now, how did they blaspheme God? This is what the brethren who have researched think is what it's referring to. In 1854, they proclaimed the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception. In other words, that Mary was clean, that she was not like other women. That, of course, is we hear about the Immaculate Conception all the time, that Jesus could, if he was God, he could not be born of something unclean. So Mary had to be clean. So we see how this is blasphemy in God's eyes. In 1870, the doctrine of papal infallibility came into power. Now you can see if you could enforce that, you start getting power back. You don't have military power, but you definitely have authority over people if they believe it. And we know that even today, people believe it. The Pope had lost his temporal power, which is political control, through the pains and sores. But papal infallibility would strengthen its spiritual influence in the future. And that's a big thing. If you teach your children that the Pope is infallible, then he becomes more powerful to the next generation.
How did the Immaculate Conception strengthen them?
No, it's blasphemy. That was
Oh.
about the blasphemy part. that
Oh,
they-
okay.
they-
Gotcha,
they
gotcha.
blaspheme God.
Okay.
So,
But it was a continuation of the Trinity idea. Once you got the Trinity, then Mary has to be the mother.
yeah,
of
you gotta
God.
keep
Yeah.
making
It's a
adjustments.
domino effect.
So can't, a lot is like a Dorito chip, you can't have just one. The thing that they didn't get was that would make Mary's parents gods, and then her grandparents gods.
Oh, she
And
must have been one of those kids that came from the angels coming down and having intercourse with demons, right? Or
Yeah.
with humans rather.
And I wanted to show you that this is important because I'm not going to stop right here. In other words, he's infallible, so he speaks and it is so. And that is definitely blasphemy. And what I'm going to show you something. You get that from the Apocalypse in History by a brother, W.H. Baker. Great book. I really enjoyed some of these things. But anyway, it's called ex cathedra. In other words, when he speaks this way, it is infallible. In other words, he doesn't speak this way at dinner and stuff like that, but he sits, and this explains what that is. It is a Latin phrase which means from the chair. Think about the seat of the beast. That's what it means, the seat. It refers to binding and infallible papal teachings which are promulgated by the Pope when he officially teaches in his capacity of the universal shepherd of the church, a doctrine on a matter of faith or morals, and addresses it to the entire world. So when he's doing this task, it's infallible. So it goes on. The concept derives from Jesus in Matthew 23, 2 and 3. Jesus spoke of the authority of the Old Testament, or the magisterium, which is the religious truth. I had to work that word up, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees have taken their seat on the chair of Moses. Therefore, do and observe whatsoever they tell you, but do not follow their example, for they preach what they do not practice. So this is where they use this, and this is what they said. Since Jesus recognizes the authority of the Old Testament magisterium when he spoke ex cathedra with the authority of Moses, we recognize that the New Testament magisterium of the church, which speaks with the authority not of Moses, but of Jesus Christ himself, possesses a binding, infallible teaching office, which is guaranteed by Christ. That is their reasoning. You do with it as you please. But when he sits on that so-called seat of Christ or seat of Moses, whatever, it's guaranteed by Christ to be truth. So anyway.
Actually, he is sitting on the seat of St. Peter.
Yeah, St. Peter.
That's the authority that it comes from, or is based on. That St. Peter supposedly is the first pope of Catholicism. So it's that throne or seat of St. Peter that he speaks from.
Right. Yes, thank you, Gerald. So we can see that from this, there is no repentance from these judgments. A prisoner in the Vatican is how Pope Pius IX was described following the capture of Rome by the armed forces of the Kingdom of Italy on the 20th of September, 1870. He actually became a prisoner in the Vatican in 1870. That's how low it went. It would be over 50 more years before that condition was lifted. And as we've talked about today, and that influence of the seat of the beast would return to the political world, but not with the military might. And just so if you don't know, I thought this was Barbara Bush for about several years, but that's actually Nancy Pelosi. There's a bigger picture of this. Somebody pointed it out to me, and Barbara Bush is actually standing over there behind the Pope. But I thought it, since George Bush was standing there, that was his wife, but that's Nancy Pelosi, who is very much in the news today, even right now. So and
Doesn't make
she's,
you kind of
And
turn.
she's also Catholic.
yeah, she's made that very clear that
Oh,
she
yeah.
is. So anyway, what we're seeing is that they have come back and they have a lot of authority and pull right now, and they may probably will get more somewhere down the road as these events that we're seeing unfold. So we shall see.
That's because you
So-
vote for these leaders. You didn't vote for Napoleon.
Right, so
We're fine.
we're glad we'll close here. Next week, we will have the sixth bowl and what that means. So anyway, that's my class for tonight. Let's see, Brother Gerald, would you close for us?
Sure. Our great Heavenly Father, we approach into your throne of grace once again at the close of our study period to express our gratitude and many thanks for your allowing us to gather around your word of truth, especially the prophecies of the last days, the apocalypse that we are engaged in. We pray that you have deliberations for tonight and pray that we have been correct in our insights as we have brought them forward for each class member. And we pray that you will help us as we further study thy word to rightly divide your word of truth and understand precisely where we are in the history of your plan and purpose. We know, Father, that the sixth vial, of which we will consider at a later time, would be the era of time in which we live. And we are advancing closer to the day in which we live with the prophecies of the apocalypse. So, Father, we pray that your blessings will further be upon us. Remember our necessities as you have so lavishly bestowed upon us the necessities of life, the temporal blessings of abundance, but especially these spiritual blessings that enable us to become more like your people, your peculiar people that you desire. We pray that we would somehow manifest that in our time and be found worthy of a place in your glorious kingdom with the coming of your Son, which we anticipate to be very near. Father, hear us in our prayer now as we come unto you, offering our thanksgiving, our praise, all glory and honor in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you all for coming.
Good to see you tonight. Take care.
Thank you, Brother Roger.
Thanks for class, Brother Roger.
All right. You're
Yeah, a
welcome.
lot of stimulating stuff there. Really good.
I feel
Thank
good.
Everybody stay
Good night.
safe.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.
Well,